Good morning. You're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Mubarakah Ibrahim, and this is Mornings with Mubarakah here on WNHHLP, streaming live on TuneIn Radio from the Beaver Hills section of New Haven, Connecticut. Welcome to the show. It is Wednesday morning, and you know this because this is your Wednesday morning voice. I am so glad that the sun is shining today, and it's a little chilly, but it's better than it was a couple of days ago because it was extremely cold a couple of days ago. So today on radio, we are talking about redefining health, what health means to you, what health has mean and has the meaning evolved, and is it important for that meaning to evolve? So I am interested in hearing from you and what you define as health. So hey, Instagram, we are on Instagram, we are on Facebook. You can find us in several locations. So I also want to remind you that if you aren't able to stick around on whatever platform you're listening to the show on right now, that you can find us on the New Haven Independent's, all of their social media, including Facebook and Periscope, Stream Me, TuneIn Radio. You can also follow us on Instagram. We're on Instagram Live as well. So we are talking about health, and this has been kind of like a theme thing that I've been talking about a lot for about 20-something years. And so although often on this show I find myself interviewing people on various topics, I always enjoy coming back home to what is so important, which is our health, because without our health, we don't have money, we don't have livelihood, we don't have happiness, we don't have a lifestyle in which we can live vibrantly. Health is such an important part of that. And so for me, it is always home base about what we need to talk about and what we need to constantly bring forward as an important issue. So one of the things that was really interesting to me is a conversation that I recently had in terms of Black people and health and avoiding what we have considered in the past as kind of like unavoidable generational diseases, heart attacks, high blood pressure, diabetes. And so I was having a conversation, and an older woman interrupted, and her interruption was, well, if you're going to get diabetes, is it meant for you to get it and you're going to get it anyway? And so my response was, well, if you believe that you're going to get diabetes no matter what you do, then you're right. Because the first part of you making any type of change is believing that you can make that change. So if you don't believe that you can make the change of changing your health, then it's not going to matter. And then we went into a conversation really a lot about how older generations of African Americans live to be, 80 years old, and they ate all of this stuff, and they really didn't think about health, right? And that is very true. Why is it true? Because for many generations, African Americans did not focus on food or activities and its relationship to their health, because the relationship that they had with food was that of survival, right? So if you are starving, if you don't have anything to eat that day, you're not really concerned about whether or not what you're being offered, how it's going to affect your health. Your first focus is, I need food for survival. We know that this is not just historically true from the time of slavery to sharecropping to post-slavery, where African American males could not get a job and women worked for less than minimum wage, 5 cents, a day, folding laundry or things like that. We know that that's actually true today. So when we look at how health and poverty is connected, all of our research shows us that your zip code is more predictive of your health outcome than your DNA code. So what does that mean? That means that people who live in poverty are more likely to suffer from every range of preventable diseases than people who do not live in poverty, including diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer. Every single disease that plagues American society is more exacerbated, happens more often in poor communities than it does in communities that are more economically, who are higher in the economic scale. There's a couple of reasons for this. And so when I decided to name this show Redefining Health, I actually looked up a couple of, I'm gonna actually pull up my notes, a couple of ways in which health has been defined, right? So some people define health as an absence of disease. Other people define health as a feeling of vitality. So is it one or the other, or is it both? We have a variety of historical ways in which health has been defined. And I think that it's really time that us as a society that we began to define health in a new way, right? So we know that for us, and I'm talking particularly to Western societies, right? So health for people in a first world country may be very different than what health is defined for people in a third world country. You know, I've been blessed and have the privilege to live inside of I think first world is like, isn't that like politically incorrect or something? Sometimes I can't keep up. So developed country, I think it's the politically correct term to describe places like the United States of America. So health in a developed country is much different than what health would be defined in an underdeveloped country. So Wikipedia defines health as a state of physical, mental, and social well-being in which disease and infirmity are absent, right? The historical definition of health that was created by Hippocrates was considered, health is a state of the bodily balance that could be achieved through behavior and medicinal actions. So both of those versions of what it is to be, do you agree with those? I would be really interested to know if you are of the agreement of, is that what your definition of health is? So for me, I would have to say, I would add to the first definition. So the Wikipedia definition says health is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being in which disease and infirmity are absent. And I would say in vitality is present. So it's not just what you don't have, but it's also what you do have. So that would be my definition of health. My personal definition of health is that it's physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. And the weakness of one weakens them all, and the strengthening of one strengthens them all, right? So if you are focused on one, it is going to affect the other. I think that for so long we have taken health to really just mean disease or not disease. We have taken health to mean it's either what you eat or what you don't eat, right? And we have not looked at, and part of this is because the way that our medical system is set up, right? The body is not looked at holistically. It's kind of like, okay, you have a problem with your leg, we're going to just take care of the problem with your leg. Every part of the body is looked at separately and not really as a whole unit. Thank goodness things are really changing. Things are beginning to change even inside of the medical community of looking at the body holistically, because we know that every part of our body is affected by the other part, and our body is affected by the environment and vice versa. The environment is affected by us, right? We know this because we have global warming, right? So everything is so it reminds me of the concept of like the butterfly effect, right? So if a butterfly flaps its wings in Malaysia, it can cause a storm in, China, kind of thing. It's all connected. So here's an example. When we think about mental health, we think about stress and how stress affects us. When we think about stress, people think of it as being anxiety producing. They think of it being it can cause depression. It can cause a whole range of what would be considered mental health problems, right? But what we don't think about is how stress is actually affecting our physical body. We know that when we are under a lot of stress, we actually raise our cortisol level, and that's a hormone in your body. So it actually changes the hormone profile of your body. When we are under stress, it actually changes the microbiome in your gut. So it is not just not unusual, but also it's not just in your mind that, hey, I'm really worried and my stomach hurts, right? That's not just some type of placebo effect for people. It is I'm really worried and my actual physiological gut biome is starting to become imbalanced, right? So one of the things that you find, like when you're really stressed about, and this is the reason why stress is more often than not the underlying cause of many diseases. I can remember when I was first introduced to the concept, I was actually reading a book by Dr. Andrew Weil. Dr. Andrew Weil was one of the first American physicians that was both a certified physician, medical physician, as well as a naturopathic doctor, right? And so anybody who's been into health and wellness over the last 20 years have probably heard of him. And I was reading one of his books, and in his book, he talked about having an intern who had such these grandiose ideas of going to third world countries and giving them like innovative medical treatments. And he wanted to really, help people in underdeveloped countries. I think that's politically correct, right? I'm sort of looking for my underdeveloped countries. And so he went to a very remote area of Africa, and he's doing his doctor thing, and he stayed over there for a year, and he came back. And when he came back, he told Dr. Weil that the number one thing that he was treating was giving people was antacids and treating them for stress-related illnesses, because stress was the number one underlying problem of most of their illnesses. The stress source differed because in America, we might stress over the car broke down, you don't have money to fix it, your kid is out at night, there's different types of stress. But over there, the stress source was, my cattle isn't producing enough milk, we have a drought and I can't produce enough grain for the season or enough food for my family. It was still sources of stress. So what we learned in the lesson is that stress exists from the time we're born to the time that we die. It doesn't matter where you are. There's no such thing as living a stress-free life. It really is about stress management. How you respond to the stress is what is the most effect on your health, right? So when we think of just kind of like mental things, we have to include our mental health issues. We have to include the physical health as a part of that, because we know that it is a system that is interacting with one another. the same thing happens with food, right? So we know now through lots of really great research about certain foods that can either benefit or harm particular physical ailments, right? We know the diabetes is a food dependent illness, right? High blood pressure isn't just about how much salt that you eat. There's lots of research about that also being directly connected to the microbiomes in your gut. So if you've never heard that term before, microbiomes is talking about we literally have an entire ecosystem of bacteria that actually lives in our gut. And in that ecosystem of bacteria, it actually communicates with our brain. It communicates with our organs. We think of bacteria as being a bad thing, but it's not really a bad thing. It is the imbalance of bacteria that causes illness, not having the bacteria. In fact, human beings are 50% bacteria. That's crazy, right? We are literally 50% bacteria. So we're kind of, it reminded me of having a symbiotic relationship, how like animals in the sea have a symbiotic relationship with with bacteria and fungi and things like that. And that's actually how we live. We don't think about it because we have this beautiful organ called the skin that keeps all of the stuff that we don't want to think about inside. But it really is the way that our body actually works. When we talk about health, we have to talk about not just food, not just movement, which is extremely, extremely important, but we also need to talk about how the way that we think affects our health, about the environments that we're in, right? Whether or not we are around people that make us feel comfortable, people that make us feel loved. We know, for example, that babies who lack physical touch when they're young, that they are more likely, significantly more likely to develop depression and anxiety as adults. So all of these are really important. One of the things that I used to always talk to my kids about, and used to make a lot of effort towards avoiding it, is that there is actually a physical condition called skin hunger. So skin hunger is when a human being goes a significant amount of time without physical touch from another human being. It actually can lead to all of the mental health issues, anxiety, digestive issues. It is actually a physiological thing. So all of this is a part of it. So hug your kids. Make sure you're physically touching your spouse. It is a real illness. And it just shows how we as human beings are not one thing. We're not one organism. We are a collection of everything that is within us and outside of us. When we think about health and we think about food and how it actually affects, so we're talking about the environment outside of us. The interesting thing about food is that things that we see as a part of the food is actually developed in a way that is a symbiotic relationship with us. So it may protect the plant itself from a pest or certain bacteria or viruses from destroying the plant, but then when we consume it, it's actually really beneficial to us. And foods work that way. So if you are just joining me, you are listening to, as I take my quick little station break, you are listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Mubarakah Ibrahim, and this is Mornings with Mubarakah. And if you're on Facebook and you're like, what is she doing? Why is she looking around? I am looking around because I am looking for this is what live radio do. I am totally looking for my cord to my stuff. So that is a problem, that I cannot find the cord to my computer. So as we're talking about health, but we're thinking about health in a very holistic way. So we want to think about not just what not just food as just a way for us to fill our bellies, because I think that that is one of the privileges that we have of living in today's society, is that one of the privileges we have in living in a developed country is that we no longer have to think about just food that fills our belly. We can actually think about food that is going to help us improve our health. There's often, like, you see hashtag health is wealth, health is wealth. But do we really think about that, and do we really consider it, right, a part of our wealth? When you have health, it's not just wealth in terms of your own personal wealth, but it also leads to wealth. So for example, one of the just practical ways in which people who are impoverished have less wealth, because they're more likely to get sick. They're more likely to have to take time off from work. They're more likely to not be able to actually engage at the level that they need to engage because of the other issues around poverty, right? So somebody who is who have a transportation issue. Let's just think of it in a very practical way. They have an issue with their transportation because they can't afford to fix their car, and so they can't get to work. And so that is going to create a ripple effect, right? So not only is it creating a ripple effect in their finances, but now it's additional stress that someone who is more economically stable or have a higher economic bracket is not going to face, because, hey, car broke, okay, let's get it fixed. I can swipe a credit card, I can go inside of my savings account. It creates just an entirely different lifestyle. But with all of that said, how do we define health for ourselves as well as for our families, right? So I'm a huge proponent, particularly coming from an African-American family who has a history of disease. So my mother had diabetes, her mother had diabetes, her father had diabetes, my father had high blood pressure. It is a very strong link of high blood pressure. So here's an interesting thing. I actually did an Ancestry.com DNA test. And Ancestry.com is a really interesting site because the amount of documents that they have on this site is so outstanding. I was able to find death certificates for great-great-great-grandparents. I was able to find birth certificates. I was able to find census records, and I was able to actually trace my ancestry back, not just from the DNA results to tell me exactly what countries in Africa that I have DNA from, but also from I was able to trace it also back to actually see the physical records of who my grandparents were and their parents. I believe all the way to, from my father's side, all the way to like 1457, around that time. And the interesting thing is that I found almost a dozen different death certificates from relatives. And what I also found was that most of them, everybody except for one, actually died from some high blood pressure induced problem. A stroke, an aneurysm, those were the main two causes of death. So that's how strong high blood pressure runs inside of that side of the family. And so that doesn't mean that I am relegated, or anybody is relegated to having to say, well, I'm going to give up and, I'm just going to eventually get high blood pressure. Your genetics is the gun. Your lifestyle is the trigger. One of the things that I think that the advantage that we have today that maybe my ancestors did not have is the ability to know how stress affects us, the ability to understand how to manage that stress, We have less, even though being Black